Dave tries to help Chris, but his umbilical won't stretch any further. Dave is literally 2 meters away from Chris when he's yanked further away. And Chris is like, I can't get out of this situation. And his umbilical is creaking. It's making a sound that you know any minute now it's going to snap. And then it does.
It snaps. So he can't see Duncan and his umbilical cord is snapped. It's pitch black. What is trapped there?
Hello and welcome to The Compendium, an assembly of fascinating things, a weekly variety podcast that gives you just enough information to stand your ground at any social gathering.
We guide you through stories from the darker corners of true crime, the hidden gems of history, and the jaw-dropping deeds of extraordinary people.
I'm Adam Cox, your ringmaster for this episode.
And I'm Kyle Risi, your deep-sea diver of drama for this episode.
Deep sea, interesting. You tying into the theme of today's episode.
Well, I'm slightly aware of today's episode, just slightly, just ever so slightly.
That's not really circus themed. Have we changed this?
Hey, no, it kind of is. Imagine like a big aquarium, right? And I'm dressed, obviously, in a mermaid costume. And I'm diving into the water, and there's a big glass window, and everyone is amazed by my ability to somersault in the water.
I think you're just like a goldfish.
I'm a mermaid.
A merman.
I'm a merman.
Before we dive in, it's a quick heads up for all you lovely freaks out there. Remember, signing up on our Patreon gives you early access to next week's episode, an entire 7 days before anyone else. And it's completely free of charge. And if you want even more, you can become a certified freak for a small monthly subscription that unlocks all of our unreleased episodes up to 6 weeks earlier. It's the best way to support the Compendium and keep us growing.
It really is. And while you're at it, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcasting app and leave us a review. Your support really helps us reach more people like you who love a good tale of the unexpected.
All right then, freaks, enough of this housekeeping. Let's buckle up and get the show started. Because in today's episode of the Compendium, we're heading 127 miles off the coast of Scotland to the middle of one of the most dangerous seas in the world, the North Sea.
It is such a shit sea.
I'm pretty sure it's like the worst sea.
It is. I mean, our coastline is on the North Sea. Mm-hmm. And the Norfolk coast is just, I've never swam in the North Sea, and I've lived here for 20 years. I will not go in that water. You don't go in water that's brown.
Well, that's just like the sand and the sediment.
Is it though? Or is it just like a load of doo-doo?
Well, I'm sure there is some doo-doo, but usually our beaches around the Norfolk coast and Suffolk have got blue flags. They're clean beaches. So yeah, it's not the nicest sea, but it's where today's story does take place. Despite the deadly storms, the heavy fog and tangled currents, the North Sea is one of the planet's busiest bodies of water. It's home to hundreds of oil rigs, and for weeks at a time, those that work in the oil industry live here.
It's probably why it's brown. Probably all that oil, right?
Yeah, I thought we covered that. It's the sand and the sediment.
Nah, I don't know. I'm suspicious.
So some of the workers that are working around this area are saturation divers, and they perform crucial maintenance to these oil rigs underwater. Mm-hmm. They are crammed into these caravan-sized, pressurized steel chambers with 5 other people, and they live in these chambers, and life in there is quite tough. It's nothing compared to what waits below, however.
What's the saturation bit about? So you're a saturation driver. What is that?
A saturation diver. So,
did I say driver?
Yeah, I meant diver. So they perform maintenance work about 100 meters down on the seabed in the pitch black, icy, cold water.
So they're like fixing the oil pump things that go into the ground.
Yeah, they work along the seabed. They're laying underwater cables. They might be repairing structures down there, maintenance, all sorts. And it's all kind of keeping these oil rigs in the modern world, essentially, in order. It kind of feels more like outer space, with every diver tethered to the surface by a lifeline. And it's a 50-meter umbilical cord that supplies air, light, warmth, and communication to those up top.
Right. So when you imagine like those old school 1950s divers with those big helmets and they're attached to like this cable that goes all the way to the top, and they've got this tiny little window.
Yeah.
That's what the umbilical cord is. It's providing them with all the nutrients. Well, the oxygen that they need. But it sounds like in the modern day time, there's way more.
Yeah.
They're getting warmth pumped in there as well. Do they get water?
Yeah, no, not actual water. They don't get like a supply of sparkling water down there. It's more hot water that's pumped around their suit.
What if they get thirsty? Then a little snack and shove a little Oreo down that umbilical cord.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like mama's getting ready to feed you.
I don't know how they can take their packed lunch down there.
No.
I don't think that works.
Okay. I'm aware of this kind of maintenance thing that happens. You get sent down, you're attached to this umbilical cord, you do all this maintenance work. Yeah, it's very important. It's a very important economical kind of part of the North Sea.
Yes.
Extracting from Mother Nature all her resources.
Yes, so, maybe not great for the planet, but hey, we need it. We need it for our cars and all sorts. So today we're
As Trump would say, drill, baby, drill.
Yeah, I know. I mean, anyway, that's another story.
Hang on. Were you going to say he's got a point?
Well, he's got a point in terms of we need obviously to, keep resources, but whether we need to keep drilling for better resources.
We need resources. We don't need to keep drilling for oil. Anyway.
That's another story.
Let's not dive into politics.
Let's not do that one, not today. So today we're actually covering what happened to a guy called Chris Lemmon at the bottom of the sea. So Chris was a relatively experienced saturation diver, having performed this job various times before, but in 2012, everything went wrong. At 2 a.m., 300 feet beneath the North Sea, Chris's umbilical cord snapped, and suddenly he was stranded in total darkness with no air, no heat, no light, nothing. He was completely and utterly alone.
Damn. It's a bit like birth, really. Because that's what happens. Your umbilical cord gets snapped. You're out there alone, no food, no water, exposed to the elements. You're now a human being. You're out of the womb. But in this sense, he's down under the sea and he's petrified. And
yeah, birth, you're actually giving life. So yeah, it's not quite the same thing.
Right, okay.
But the umbilical cord does provide life. That's why it's
That's what I was playing on, basically. You said umbilical cord, I went to giving birth.
Yeah, well, that's kind of why they call it that. So for me, I mean, I'm not the best swimmer and I don't like being out of my depth, but this is one of the stories that really gripped me because, claustrophobia at the bottom of the sea, not able to breathe. I was just like pretty kind of captivated by this story.
Yeah, you're not great in water, are you?
No,
you get really anxious. Like the times that we've been out snorkeling or scuba diving, you're just been like, nope. But me, I'm like a felt dolphin, man. Like slick in and out of the water, swim really fast, like diving, somersaulting. I love the water. I guess because I grew up in South Africa, right? So when I wasn't running wild and free on the African plains, I was in the Indian Ocean swimming with the pilchards.
Well, didn't you just have a swimming pool?
Yeah, but I would also go to the ocean, right?
Okay.
I'd go down to Durban, chill out there, Belito Bay,
Right. Well, before we plunge into this tale, let's first start by covering a little bit more about what a saturation diver does. And it's a method designed to allow divers to work at extreme depths for extended periods of time without a constant risk of decompression sickness. So what is decompression sickness, or DCS?
It's like the bends, right?
Yeah, it can be commonly referred to as the bends, which is a condition that occurs when dissolved gases, primarily nitrogen, come out of solution in the body's tissues and bloodstream due to a rapid decrease in pressure. So it's a common risk for divers who ascend too quickly to the surface without allowing sufficient time for these gases to safely leave their bodies.
So this nitrogen gas just builds up inside your system, right? Creating like these little pockets.
Yeah, that's right. Because when a diver is underwater, the increased pressure causes more nitrogen from the breathing gas to dissolve into their bloodstream. And during a proper ascent, a diver stops at intervals called decompression stops, which allow that nitrogen to safely exit the body through exhalation. So if the ascent is too rapid, or if the diver skips these decompression stops, the nitrogen forms bubbles in the blood and tissues, and these bubbles can cause various symptoms and complications, everything from having a rash to muscle pain to then life-threatening issues if they don't ascend properly.
Our friend used to work in the Norfolk University Hospital in the bends unit, and didn't her brother actually have to go to that place, and he has to go into this decompression cabin where he had to stay there for like 12 hours while he properly decompressed, essentially.
Yeah.
Scary stuff, right?
Absolutely. And that's just 12 hours. These guys are down there for days. So to give you an example of how long you might have to have a decompression stop, if you dive for 30 meters for 40 minutes, you would need a 10-minute stop on the way back to the surface in order to, allow those gases and bubbles to kind of dissolve when you breathe out. But if you're working at 100 meters below the sea level for 6 hours, so that's a standard day for a saturation diver, you'd need about 5 days of decompression before you could get back to normal.
Wow. So
surface.
you are not just going down there for the day, right? If you're going that deep, you're there for a while.
Exactly. So you've got to do a full day's work at the bottom of the ocean. You can't obviously then spend 5 days in getting back up to the
Sure. So they
sea
live
level.
down there.
Yeah. So in the UK, I think the legal amount of time or the most amount of time you can spend down there is 28 days. So yeah, you would eat, sleep and live entirely within these chambers alongside your team for up to a month whilst you're working out at sea.
So can I just get this straight then? So let's say you clock off and you're done for the day. Are you just inside your same suit under the water, or are you going to some kind of chamber where it's dry, you have a bed, you've got a toilet, etc.?
Yeah, of course. So the chambers that you would go in to begin with, they're the size of like small vans. They're about 2 meters high. You'd be up in there for up to 28 days at a time, and sometimes with up to 12 people. There's different rooms. So there's a living quarters, a lounge area, a place where you might do some paperwork, a toilet, a shower. You sleep inches away from the next person, so you don't have any privacy. And you're constantly monitored by cameras 24/7.
What are they monitoring for?
Well, I guess your health and things like that.
Right,
So,
checking your vitals.
yeah, so you could be in the shower and they've got a camera in there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Lovely.
So you can wave to the people.
You have no privacy whatsoever.
Nope.
You are stuck. God forbid you be claustrophobic. This is not the job for you.
Absolutely not.
And I guess it makes sense that they need to keep monitoring you. I guess they are checking for the pressure inside the cabin as well and the effects that it's having on you. I did hear this really horrific story, and it might be one that we potentially revisit, but it's kind of similar to this, where this decompression diver was living inside one of these kind of chambers and it malfunctioned, which meant that one of the portholes that allow you to then exit out, because you've got to go through one door, shut that, and it equalizes with the water that's down on the ocean floor. Then you can open that door. That had malfunctioned. And what had happened is there was this catastrophic incident where just everything that was on the other side of the door got sucked out. And it was through an opening the size of like a golf ball.
Oh, God.
And the people got sucked through that hole. They all died.
I don't even know what to say about that.
It's horrible. Through the size of a golf ball. So we have a sense of what he does, who he is, why he's down there, and how he's living his day-to-day life when he's not physically out there on the seabed fixing these pipes.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, to sign up to this job, like you say, you can't be claustrophobic. You do get, I think, around about £1,500 on a diving day. So that seems pretty good, but there's a lot of risks with this job.
Of course, any job that is high risk is going to be paying really well, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the jobs that are like in the oil and gas industry, they do pay extremely well because, hey, you're out there on the North Sea. Anything could happen.
So Chris, he was pretty used to these conditions. Like I say, he didn't start out as a diver, but over time it became a career that seemed to suit him. He was used to being away from his fiancée, Morag, weeks at a time.
Morag?
Morag, yeah.
Is he Scottish?
He is not, but she is.
Ah, see, my auntie was called Morag.
It's a nice name.
Is it?
I always think of it, and no offense to your auntie, or neither Morag, Chris's fiancée, but I do just think of a cow, a big, hairy cow called Morag.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. We can't really say that, so we'll whisper this, you know. Morag and Heffy.
It's just really nice names for a cow.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway. So they'd be away weeks at a time. And in order to keep in touch, they would send like video diaries back and forth to each other, like having a chat, how their day's going and things like that. And he can only do that when he's not in the chambers. When he's in the chamber, he has to resort to just like email communication to her. But when he's just on the boat, whilst they're out at sea, they would like send video diaries back and forth.
Oh, God. So when he is coming out of the chamber and spending those 5 days, decompression, going up to the surface, getting onto the boat, he's not then going home. He's staying on the boat waiting for his next shift.
Potentially, yeah. Like I say, you're away a long time.
I don't know what's worse. Would I grumble more at being stuck on a boat in the North Sea? Or would I prefer to be down under, even though there's more risk there, but it's probably more comfortable. You know, you're not rocking in the wind with all the swells.
Yeah, well, on the boat, I think it's actually quite nice because he does a bit of a video tour and they've got things like a sauna, a sunbed.
Really?
And other sort of like gyms and stuff like that. So you can have like a relatively normal life when you're on the boat, but as soon as you go into that chamber, it's obviously a different story.
Sure, I get it.
Yeah. And so Morag herself, she was actually a school teacher. Together, Chris and her, they were building a life filled with lots of plans for the future. They'd met 5 years earlier at a party and they kind of really hit it off. They moved in together And he started becoming a saturation diver where she continued to be a teacher. She became a head teacher, and they decided that actually what they wanted to do was build a house as well as get married. So whilst Chris is away at sea, he would come back and help with the building of this house that they were doing in Scotland, as well as planning this wedding.
Pretty good going for a cow to achieve all of that, right? And when he's off, like when he comes back home, he's like, "Hey there, Morag, spread your legs there, lassie. I'm gonna be milking you."
She seems like a really nice woman, by the way.
Oh, and by the way, before we get into any jokes, does Chris survive? Or is that a big spoiler? Because I need to know, can I take the piss, or do we need to be like, this is really serious? Or is it just not part of the flavour of this? It's supposed to be a big twist in the
I don't want to spoil it, but we can have a joke along the way.
A joke, great. So Morag the cow is fine, even though she's a really nice lady.
Anyways, back to Chris. He's on board the ship. It's called the Topaz. He's giving a sort of video tour to Morag to kind of show her around the ship. Mm-hmm. And he sort of shows what the sort of diving bell is. And so this is kind of a really crucial part to help divers go down to the sea level. Yeah. It's a bit like an underwater elevator, but instead of going just up and down, it's pressurized as well. So like the chambers. And it drops the divers. They go onto the diving bell, go right down to the bottom of the water. They then can swim out, do whatever work
but they are
need
stopping
to do.
Along the way, because this is the thing that's stopping them periodically to help them.
No, because the diving bell is at the same pressure as the bottom of the ocean.
Oh, so they decompress while they're on the ship.
So yeah, they're on the ship. So the chambers are contained on the ship, in the middle of the ship. Then within the chamber is the diving bell. All of this is the same level of pressure to match where they are diving to. So the diving bell gets lowered to the bottom of the ocean, which allows the divers to go out. They do their work for 6 hours. They go back to the diving bell, and that hoists them back up to the chamber, where they then carry on their evening, go to sleep for the next day when they have to again do another shift.
Right, wow, okay, wow, this is so fascinating.
There's nearly 100 people aboard this ship, but when you go down in the diving bell, there's just like a few of you, and so they become almost like your family, and so you have to get on with them and be able to kind of work really well with them. So Chris's crew, when he goes diving, is made up of 3 others, including a guy called Dave. He's another diver who's more experienced than Chris, a medic called Stuart, and a guy called Duncan, who is the bellman. So he's the one that stays on board the diving bell, and he communicates to Dave and Chris while they're on the seabed, and kind of is a bit of the bridge between, I guess, the divers and the diving bell, and then also to the ship.
I guess like when he meets anyone and they go, "Hey, so what do you do?" He goes, "I'm a bellman." Like straight away, that's the kind of profession where you're going to be like, "But I need to tell you more."
Yeah.
Because otherwise your first mind is like, "Oh, he's the nun with the bell in Game of Thrones is going, shame. Yeah,
it's a lot more than that. So once you're in the chamber, the door shuts, the first thing that happens is your voice goes all high-pitched because the gas they use is called heliox, which is a mixture of helium and oxygen. And Chris says that whilst it's kind of funny at first, the novelty of having a squeaky voice quickly wears off, especially if you're down or in this chamber for like 28 days. All is going to plan, but on September the 18th, 2012, it was Chris, Duncan and Dave's turn to dive with Stuart on standby as the medic. Chris and his dive partner Dave were tasked with replacing a section of underwater pipe work. Chris and Dave suit up. Chris pulls on his wetsuit. He pulls on his helmet, which is like a Kevlar dome weighing about 20 kilos. It's complete with a light and a camera on top so they can see his movements and obviously to light up what he's going to be working on. Of course, he's got his umbilical cord, which is his lifeline. And so he climbs into the diving bell, they go down, and then he's out into the water and then starts working on his mission with Dave. On this particular day at 2 a.m., the conditions were particularly rough. There was a 35-knot wind and 5-meter swells in the ocean, so it's incredibly choppy, which was not ideal, but it's not unusual for this kind of work. It's not severe enough to call it off.
It is a North Sea, right, as well, so
it's probably pretty standard. And when divers go down to the seabed, the ship relies on a system called dynamic positioning, or DP, which uses computer algorithms and thrusters to keep the ship steady over a specific point on the seabed.
Yes,
so they don't just use an anchor. They have a technology and a computer system that keeps it still.
And is that because the North Sea is just too deep to anchor something down? But then I guess with an anchor, you can still drift.
Exactly.
They need a very precise location to stay at.
Because they've lowered the diving bell, which is down there for 6 hours, and they can't just be drifting around in the water. They've got to keep that still for the divers. And so it's, a combination of probably it could be too deep in certain instances, and the other thing to make sure that it's critical that they stay in the exact same spot as much as possible.
And why is that? Is that because the diving bell is connected to the ship?
Yeah.
And therefore they need to stay very close or just above that diving bell because that's how they can get oxygen and water, check off all the vitals and things like that.
Yeah, because if you think about it, you've got the ship, you've got the diving bell, which is underneath like an elevator. It goes straight down. Mm-hmm. And then if that ship starts to drift and then connected to the diver bell or the divers, then they're just going to get pulled along in the water.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
So they have to keep still for them to do their work.
With you.
So Chris and Dave, they're carrying out their work, and then all of a sudden they hear an alarm go off via their communication channel. But Chris and Dave didn't think too much of it because alarms were kind of routine part of life. There's all these different tests and checks constantly going on that trigger them. So to them, this was pretty standard. But then when Duncan, the dive supervisor, spoke calmly, there was a subtle shift in his tone that Chris immediately picked up on. His voice...
That'll do it.
Yeah, he was kind of like, that doesn't sound like normal Duncan.
What's up, Duncan? Nothing. I just dropped my croissant.
Everything's fine. He basically said to them, you just leave what you're doing and just come back to the diving bell.
He's trying to keep them calm, basically.
Yeah. And the thing is, on a dive, things do break. Things need resetting. And so it's not like it's uncommon for them to get called back. So they just put down their tools and they then start making their way back to the diving bell. However, they're in this sort of structure at the moment, so they don't have a clear sight of the diving bell, which usually has a light on it so that they can kind of see really easily where they need to head to. So they kind of climb back up onto this structure, which they'd been working on underneath at the bottom of the ocean, and they look and they go, well, where is the diving bell? Because usually it's 50 meters away on this sort of umbilical cord.
Shit, they've drifted.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, oh, shit. For them, the only thing that they can do is they're going to have to swim along the umbilical cord, kind of pulling themselves in.
And I imagine it's pitch black, right?
It's pitch black. So where the hell they are.
Good job they've got their umbilical cord.
Exactly. That's why it's a lifeline. And for them, the reality is sort of set in that actually, the ship had drifted. So something had gone wrong. There was a catastrophic failure with the dynamic positioning system. Mm-hmm. And because you had these waves of 5 meters, the ship essentially started drifting into the ocean. So that wasn't supposed to happen because the system had multiple backups to ensure that it could never fail. But on this occasion,
it failed.
All those backups also failed.
Oh, God.
So Chris and Dave, they're scrambling back towards the bell, using their umbilicals as a guide to reel themselves in. Now, there's usually a fair amount of slack for them to easily kind of move around in the bottom of the ocean. But for some reason, Chris's umbilical was unusually tight. So Duncan, back on the bell, said to Chris, you need to give your umbilical more slack because it's too taut.
Been snagged.
Yeah, and the umbilical cord, which goes all the way to the diving bell and is attached to the diving bell with bolts.
Yeah.
And the strain on the umbilical is starting to kind of pull the bolts off the wall. It's like groaning. So it's almost like it's snagged on something.
Yeah.
And because it's snagged and the ship is drifting, the two things are kind of pulling in the opposite direction.
And it's turning a bolt.
It's pulling the bolts off the wall because it's too tight. And that's why Duncan's like, you need to give it some more slack.
Yeah.
Something's going to break because actually Duncan's in danger because that whole wall could cave in. So Chris is trying to remain calm. He spots his lifeline was caught on a jagged metal part of the structure. Mm-hmm. And that's what was causing this issue. So Chris is doing his best to try and loosen it up and kind of get away from it. But it just wasn't happening because of the way that the ship was drifting off into the ocean, and that's like an 8,000-ton ship or something. There's no way that Chris could easily maneuver himself away to kind of get free. Dave tries to help Chris, but his umbilical won't stretch any further. And Dave is literally 2 meters away from Chris when he's yanked further away. And all he can do is look at Chris as Dave's being pulled back into the ocean. And Chris is like, I can't move. I can't get out of this situation. And his umbilical is creaking. It's making a sound that any minute now it's going to snap. And then it does.
It snaps. So he can't see Duncan and his umbilical cord is snapped. It's pitch black. What is trapped there?
Communication is lost to Chris completely. His electricity is gone, so he has no light. Uh-huh. He has no oxygen. He has no hot water keeping him warm. This is it.
So what does that mean?
He does have a little gas canister as kind of an emergency oxygen supply, which gives you around about 5 to 10 minutes. So should something happen, you take this canister, you connect that up, and that gives you just enough time
to back to the bell.
Yeah. There's no bell.
Fuck!
Duncan obviously didn't know what's happened, and he's reeling in Chris's umbilical cord as quickly as he can, but he realizes something isn't right. This feels different. There's no weight on the end of it. He radios to the ship, "I've lost my diver," and he's trying to keep calm, but he's really concerned about Chris because they don't have long to get him back. It's been about 5 minutes since the umbilical cord was cut. Stuart, the medic, is called up to be on standby, and meanwhile on the main boat, the team are doing everything they can to fix that DP system. But because all the backups had failed, they can't do anything to turn it on, and it's extremely unusual. So it means the ship needs to be moved manually and be held into place by someone like guiding the controls themselves, which is not easy to do. It's like a two-person job, and so they do their best to try and get the ship closer to where Chris is.
And the problem there by doing that manually is that on the ocean surface, it's not just that the waves are pushing you left or right. You've got all sorts of things. You've got something called heave, which means that you're going up and down. You've got pitch, where it means that the front of the boat's going up and then going down, and then you've got the back of the end that's going up and down. You've also got sideways drift, forward drift, like where the waves are pushing you forward. So you've got like a three-dimensional area where you are getting forces from all different directions. So having to do that manually is freaking hard, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So you rely on these automatic dynamic systems to kind of keep you in position, pushing you into the right place.
This is a two-person job because they've both got their hands on different controls, trying to keep it in a position, or like you say, trying to at least keep it steady.
Adjust the heave, adjust the pressure from the sides, everything.
So the guys on the ship, they're doing everything they can. It's now 10 minutes since the umbilical was cut. So this is at the point when Chris's emergency canister runs out.
And he's definitely engaged that, has he?
That's the first thing you would
Otherwise, he'd be dead.
Yeah, but at the moment, it's come up to 10 minutes. If he's still got it, there's not much time left. The crew realizes this, know that actually he's now out of oxygen. So they send out a ROV, a remote operated vehicle, which has a camera and a light attached to it, so they can see if they can find Chris, see what he's doing, see if he's okay. If they can find him, they at least know where they need to go to and steer the ship. But the realization is this might not be a rescue, it might be a body recovery.
Oh.
So the crew direct the ROV towards the structure where Chris was, but spotting Chris in complete darkness is not going to be easy. They don't know if he's on the seabed, the structure that they were working on, and so trying to find him and not get lost, that's going to be pretty difficult. The picture being sent back to the ship is just cloudy and murky. This mission was too long to try and find him. Then the structure eventually appears, and not too long after that, part of the umbilical cord that belonged to Chris is also there, so there is some hope.
I guess the umbilical cord could be pointing in the direction potentially where Chris was, used as a potential clue.
Exactly. So the ROV follows that umbilical cord to the top of the structure.
I'm so clever. I'm so smart.
And there on screen appears Chris. There is some relief by the crew, but Chris is laying down. He's pretty still. There is some movement, but is that just the ocean's current moving Chris's lifeless body?
Wow.
The crew are still trying to get the ship closer to allow Dave to go recover Chris, but the DP is not coming back online, and doing it manually so far is just not working. Suddenly, one of the crew catches a small wave from Chris. He's alive.
A wave?
They don't know how.
Hi, guys.
He's waving to the camera of the ROV, and he's like saying, "Yep, I'm here. I'm still alive." But they have no idea. They're like, how is this even possible? Because it's been over 10 minutes. But then something else happens. Chris's body starts to twitch. And for the guys that are watching this, they're like, is he dying? Are they watching him die?
Okay.
It's now 20 minutes since the umbilical cord was cut. Chris is now still. Another 5 minutes go by, and the ship still wasn't close enough to allow Dave to go back to recover Chris.
Okay.
The crew have tried everything, and then, as a last resort, they decided to do a hard reboot of the system, which in effect is turn it off and turn it on again.
Turn it on again, yeah.
And
it works. Oh, God. It's what you should have done. It's what every IT technician says. Have you turned it on and off again? And we always lie. We always go, yeah, we have. We have. I need you to come down here. So they come down, they turn it on, they turn it off, and it works. And then you look like an absolute twat.
Yeah.
In this instance, they turn it on and they turn it off again.
And the thing is, they waited 25 minutes to do this.
I know.
But you might be thinking, why did they take so long? So apparently there is some rationale for this, because what had happened so far was pretty unprecedented in terms of all these backup systems failing. So the crew didn't want to restart the system while they had a level of control of the boat, and they worried if they had turned it off and then tried to reboot it, they could lose everything.
Right.
But at this point, it was kind of, this is the last-ditch attempt.
25 minutes later.
Mm.
I mean, that should be your last-ditch attempt at like 10 minutes later when his oxygen started running out.
Probably.
But that's pretty incredible. So if you only had 10 minutes worth of oxygen, that must just be an estimate, right? He must have been able to kind of get some more oxygen out there. Or maybe he was really clever and just slowed down his breathing.
Yeah, we'll come on to what happened.
I'm so smart.
So the DP system is now back online, and the ship is maneuvering back into place to allow Dave to head back out to the structure to most likely get Chris's body.
Mm-hmm.
Dave heads out into the water. It's about 30 minutes after the incident when Dave sees the lights from the ROV, and now he has a rough idea where Chris is. Dave makes his way over to the ROV, and on top of that structure, he sees Chris, and Chris is not moving, so Dave just assumes the worst, and, you know, he's got a job to do, and that's what he needs to focus on, putting his emotions aside. He takes Chris back to the diving bell, but it's not easy carrying that level of weight in the conditions that, you know, that they were in. It was pretty tough. So he picks him up, and Duncan's there helping to reel him in, and they get Chris back to the bell. It's about 36 minutes since the umbilical cord was cut. Duncan pulls off Chris's helmet. His face is blue.
Ugh.
Duncan lays him down and gives him 2 breaths of air to the mouth. And just like that, Chris comes to.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Duncan doesn't quite believe it because 2 breaths is all it took.
I don't think I was that hot. I don't think Chris was that attracted to me.
Am I that good? Chris was alive against all odds. He had survived without oxygen at the bottom of the sea for over 20 minutes.
The North Sea. Like, all the stinky water's getting in my lungs.
Yeah, it's kind of gross. The rest of the crew don't believe what they're seeing, and they're just so happy that they see Chris. He's sitting up, he's talking, and they're like, how is he in such a good condition? So for Chris, he remembers most of it quite clearly. He recalls the moment the umbilical snapped, causing him to fall backward and sinking to the bottom of the seabed.
Oh, like a Jack from the Titanic moment.
I guess so, yeah.
Where like she has to let him go and you just see him like disappearing into the abyss.
He's on top of the structure at this point, and then, yeah, it snaps. He gets hurled backwards, and he makes his way to his feet. But remember, he doesn't have a light anymore. So he's now got to try and work out, well, which way do I go?
Yeah. And also, what way's up?
Because for him, he thinks, well, actually, if I get on top of the structure, that's probably the best place that they'll be able to find me.
Yes.
But he can't see anything. He puts his arms out and he can't feel anything. So he just has to make the best guess of moving forward. But think about it. He could just be walking into the middle of the ocean into his death.
And just by the sheer chance he's picked a decent direction that they would be able to find him.
Pretty much. He kind of thinks, okay, well, I'll try this way. So he puts his arms out and he kind of feeling around, and then he comes across the structure, which is pretty lucky. And so for him, he's like, well, at least I've found this. And he starts to kind of pull himself up onto that structure. When he finally reaches the top of it, he looks up, and I guess he's expecting to see the glow of the bell or a sight of Dave, but nothing. All he can see is just that pitch black, and there is this eerie silence. Normally he can hear the distant hum of the ship's thrusters. And so I guess it starts to hit him that this could be it. This is probably death for him.
Yeah.
He quickly calculated in his mind, it took him about 3 or 4 minutes to climb up. And even if Dave had been waiting there to take him back to the bell, his emergency gas supply was probably too low to get him back to the diving bell safely. Chris realized there was not much else he could do. He regulated his breathing and fought to stay calm as best as possible. Strangely, as the hopelessness of the situation became clear, a kind of peace washed over him.
He was accepting it, was he?
Yeah, the fight or flight panic kind of drained away, and his body seemed to just accept the inevitable.
But what about Morag?
He did think of life flashing before his eyes, as that kind of tends to do when you're in this sort of situation. He thought of Morag, his fiancée. He thought of the house that he wouldn't get to see finished. He thought of his parents, his friends, his family. And I guess for him, he felt bad for the grief that he was going to cause his family. And that's kind of what he was thinking in those moments.
That's really sad.
So with nothing left in his control, Chris just waited alone in the darkness for whatever would come next. His emergency gas canister is about to run out, so this is it. Chris said that the word miracle feels a bit too abstract or out there. He thought, like, a miracle, could that really happen to him? But even he has to admit that what happened next felt something extraordinary. He doesn't remember being pulled back or being rescued by Dave as such. The next thing he remembers is being on the diving bell with Duncan. And he had spent about 35 to 40 minutes with no source of air.
Mm-hmm.
Chris assumed his survival had tied to the extreme cold. He had heard stories of children falling through ice in Scandinavia and their bodies entering a near stasis state, slowing their oxygen consumption to the point of survival. And then hospitals use a similar technique during open heart surgery, cooling patients' bodies and blood to near hibernation. Essentially, with the heat supply removed from his suit, his body was able to go into this hibernation mode. But even with that explanation, Chris's survival didn't entirely add up. Another possible explanation lies in the gas he was breathing. So saturation divers use a helium-oxygen mix. And in Chris's case, just 6% oxygen. And so while that concentration could be really harmful on the surface, at the bottom of the sea with that pressure, it's the equivalent to breathing a high percentage of oxygen. And so the theory is that oxygen saturation flooded Chris's tissues, providing just enough to sustain him during those crucial minutes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, all of those explanations sound quite plausible to me. We haven't touched upon angels.
It could have been angels. You're right, yeah.
Jennifer Aniston would be very proud of me.
But I think for some people, what they can't believe is that there's no brain damage or any lasting physical effects without that level of oxygen he had. So
he's not brain damaged?
No, nothing. He is literally back to normal within a few hours.
Damn.
So he still wrestles with that word that it's a miracle that he's alive, but he can't argue the facts because he survived against all odds. What he's quick to emphasize, though, is the role of teamwork. On the Topaz, every person was a vital cog in his survival or ensuring
Well, not
his
the
survival.
people who took 36 minutes to reset the bloody system.
I mean, they could have been a bit quicker, but...
You think?
But the immediate people around him, like Duncan and Dave, that was kind of a proper team effort to get him back one way or another. Remove just one of those people and the outcome could have been very different. For Stu, the medic on board the Topaz, the moment Chris was brought into the chamber was one of huge relief. Chris was alive, he was breathing, and aside from needing some warming up and some rest, he's absolutely fine. So Stuart sat with him, taking his pulse, keeping a close eye on him as Chris sort of half dozed in and out, sort of finally relaxing. Then Chris opened his eyes and looked at Stu and he said, "Stu, do you know, it's okay." And Stuart smiled, thinking, "Yeah, I know you're okay." But then Chris shook his head. He went, No, it's okay," he repeated.
What's he talking about?
"I was just drifting off to sleep. I was kind of sad for a bit, but then I was cold and I got a bit numb, but then I was just falling asleep."
Is he talking about coming to terms with him dying?
Yeah, he said, "It's not that bad." And in that moment, it hit Stu really heavily because I think, obviously he's very lucky to be alive, but he realized that Chris was sort of recounting his death experience or his near-death experience. And to be alone in that darkness, Chris had accepted his fate. And for Stuart, it was kind of really emotional moment for him to hear Chris say that he was ready to die.
Yeah, and I think it's incredible that he's managed to stay so calm throughout this entire process anyway. And I think if he hadn't have come to terms with the fact that he was going to die, he may have panicked more. It may have intensified his breathing, and he wouldn't have survived.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, the way that he was able to control his breathing and
emotions,
keep calm and emotions probably helped, prolong his survival time.
It gives you that reassurance that when you are close to the end, that actually it is possible it could be quite peaceful, obviously, depending on how you go.
I think that's what Chris was saying. Dying hadn't felt scary. It just felt okay.
It's just okay.
And that is the incredible survival story, and I will say miracle, of Chris Lemmon's almost last breath at the bottom of the ocean.
Wow. That's crazy. And how's he doing today? Is he still doing saturation diving?
Well, if you thought that he had been put off by his near-death experience, then think again. Yeah.
God.
Because I think within a few weeks, he was back out there.
Shut up.
With Duncan and Dave.
I'm assuming he didn't tell Morag about this.
Morag knew. She was a little bit concerned.
You think?
But I think
But she's probably like, do you know what? That $1,500 check.
That's going to
every time you dive for that. I'm going to do things with that.
I'm going to get a nice kitchen with that. But I think what all of them realized is actually the equipment. They had so much trust in that and the people on board that ship. That if anything, they felt safer with that team.
Because their camaraderie.
Yeah,
There's their trust, right?
Exactly. So he had no worries about going out, at least initially. I think he's looked back on it since and said, do you know what, 10 years on from this or whatever, I definitely don't want to do that again.
No.
And so Morag, they finished their house, they moved to France, they got married, they've got their happy ending. And so, yeah, all's well and ends well.
Wow. Where did you hear about the story?
Well, there's a Netflix documentary called Last Breath, which has actual recorded footage of the disaster.
Really?
So you get to see Chris on his own and waving to the ROV. So it's pretty fascinating to watch that. And his survival story has now caught the attention of Hollywood. And there's a film out in the cinema starring Finn Cole, who was in Peaky Blinders. Also, Woody Harrelson, he's playing Duncan.
No. Hang on, Woody Harrelson is the guide from Hunger Games, right?
Yeah, and he's been in Cheers. He's been in loads of things.
Yeah. Oh, cool. What a great cast.
Yeah, so they're starring in the movie called Last Breath, and that is out on the 28th of February.
Oh, about now? Or is it on Netflix?
No, this is in the cinema, this one.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how Hollywood does their take on this survival story.
Yeah. I wonder if they do include like that Jack moment where he kind of just drifts into the abyss. You know what I mean? Where like the umbilical cord gets snapped and then he starts drifting away and then he kind of just fades into nothing.
Possibly.
That would make a great shot.
I did watch the trailer. I can't remember if it was in that. But what I had noticed is, because they're in these decompression chambers and everything, they didn't have their squeaky voices.
Oh, no.
So I thought, they probably cut that out because for like a 2-hour movie, which is supposed to be quite serious, that wouldn't have been great.
Yes, it wouldn't be great, right? It'd be difficult to take things seriously.
Some creative license there.
It's like when they film any films that are in space, right? A lot of the time they're like, do you know what? We don't have budget for degravitizing everything. So we're just going to make up some excuse to say, like, there's no gravity.
Yeah.
Or like there's this weird chip on board that just like, you turn it on and it's like, then it's just like being on the ground.
Yeah, we don't have budget for those kind of effects.
Nice.
Shall we run the outro?
Let's do it.
And that brings us to the end of another fascinating foray into the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating things. We hope you enjoyed the ride as much as we did.
If today's episode sparked your curiosity, do us a favor and follow us on your favorite podcasting app. It truly makes a world of difference and helps more people discover the show.
And for our dedicated freaks out there, don't forget, next week's episode is already waiting for you on our Patreon, completely free to access.
If you want even more, then you can join our Certified Freaks tier to unlock our entire archive and delve into all of our exclusive content and sneak peeks of what's coming up next.
We drop new episodes every Tuesday, and until then, we'll see you next time.
Goodbye for now.